Hi, everybody. My name is Madison, and today we're going to be talking about security conferences through a COVID lens. Debbie will be moderating the webinar and also giving a little bit more information from her perspective. And I just wanted to give you guys a little update. The next webinar will take place in August, and from then on, we'll be moving to a monthly content theme. So there will be other types of content that are produced each month, all related back to a central theme. More information will come on that in the future. So just wanted to give a welcome to everyone. I'm sure most of you are informed on our mission. We are Base Cybersecurity Institute. Everything we do is in honor of internationally recognized cybersecurity expert Becky Bass. And our 4 pillars are research, education, technology transfer, and public policy. Our webinar series is an attempt to create awareness around different topics, start discussions, and bring people together from different realms of the cybersecurity space and beyond. We're hoping to improve cybersecurity through exposure to the topic and education on that as well. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Debbie to introduce our speakers.
Hello, everyone. I'm Debbie Hindis. I'm one of the people who was brought into cybersecurity by Becky Bass. In fact, that's how I first met Caroline Wong, who's one of our panelists today. Caroline is Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt, of course, a security company, and she has been in information security for 16 years. Along with Caroline, we have Omar Zarabi, who is the founder and CEO of Port 53, and he has been an active member of BCI, so thank you for that, Omar. And he has been active in security for about 8 years, and his company has participated in security events around the country and around the world. So he's going to have some great stories to tell about that. Caroline has been very active as a speaker. Having had to coordinate schedules at RSA, I can tell you that it's not unusual for her to be at 4 or 5 speaking events at any big conference. So I think she'll be able to give us a great perspective on what it's like to participate from that point of view. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And what I'd like to do is get to know the audience a little bit. So I'm going to launch a poll with a few questions, and I'd ask that everybody answer the questions. And gee, you know, I should have had a little bit of music to go along with that. But while we're doing that, because it'll take a few minutes, what I'm going to do is remind everybody of all of the cool things. Of being at shows. So remember this. And big shows are fun. You can all see my screen, right? Somebody nod. Great. Okay. So they're topical. Those sheep are chairs. And that same company, you might be able to see that the people in the booth have little ears on, and they were giving away little sheep. Very cute. And they can be very clever. So here, there's a company called Tinfoil. So they leaned into the whole tinfoil hat thing, and they were giving out tinfoil hats. And furthermore, they had cats at their booth, and they were helping the Humane Society of Silicon Valley and making it possible for people to do adoptions of animals. So social awareness has moved into these events. This was at RSA in 2019, I'm pretty sure. That attracted over 45,000 people to San Francisco, millions of dollars of revenue to the city. Another thing that shows do is they allow people to meet up. So we recognize one of the people in this picture. I'm sure Caroline knows very well what year this was. Since you were
that bump is now sitting on that bed right there.
Exactly. To the right, you can see an event put on by the Executive Women's Forum at Blackhat. So one of the things that you do at events is you get to meet up with either people you already know or people who have some similarity with you. This is the event that I think you're in the room for. Some of you may recognize the person at the front of the room, who is Joel Holland. And I believe that both Madison and Bill Yake were here as well. This was an event put on by the MIT Club. So there's a number of events that go on around RSA and Blackhat and other big conferences that may be even of more value than the events themselves. And then, of course, there are the parties. I showed a menu from a PR company lunch that I've attended at RSA for multiple years. And on the right, you see a bar where it was basically a futile attempt to try to get the attention of the people who were also drinking and eating, very typical of an RSA party. And I just threw this in because although Maker Faire is a little low on security, it's a lot of fun. And there were at least one year where Maker Faire happened the weekend after RSA. And so it was like old home week for all the people that you saw at RSA, then you saw them at Maker Faire the following weekend. So that was a lot of fun. And of course, startups get showcased at big shows, which can be a great thing if a little overlooked. Look at the number of booths. This is just one room at RSA. And analysts do presentations at big shows because they've got a concentration of their audience there. And this is something that I did at Centera. So I was a director of marketing at Centera for 3 years, which is where I got all of these, most of these pictures from security events. So we presented at an event in Vegas that I don't even think, excuse me, the event exists anymore. And we got a suite. Now it turns out to be a very nice suite. That was an accident. Okay, this was not the way we lived at Centera. We were a Series A company, but it turned out to be pretty cost effective and more cost effective than trying to get a meeting room on the show floor. Now, it was not all luxurious. So this is what it was like in the Marriott Penn one year, where they took a big room and they put up all these dark booths. And for privacy reasons, they put ceilings on them. So this is not a trick of the camera. You can see Becky there and also Mike Loftus, for those of you who know him. And it was that dark. Okay, it was really being in the equivalent of a farm. And companies have done many of their own events. This was a Red Hat event about security. For some reason, they thought lab coats would be a good idea. They've since been purchased, so maybe I don't know, maybe it was a good idea, and maybe it wasn't. And this was one of my favorite moments, but we'll get to that, I think, a little bit. So let's look at our full results. Okay, so this is what we're seeing here. Let's share the results. So most people Did not attend one of the big conferences, about 50-50 in 2019 or 2020. About the same percentage have spoken. And what was your favorite thing about RSA? There we go. Networking, the unofficial events, the parties, the show floor, and the official RSA sessions, not so much. And one person went to 2021 virtual and heard that all together. So I don't think these, I don't think these results are very surprising, but I think it's good background to keep in mind. And what I'd like to do is turn the floor over to Caroline to talk a little bit about her experiences with events and with speaking. Caroline, you have the floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. What a fun little walk down memory lane. That particular year at RSA conference where Debbie, you showed the photo of you and I together. I think I was rushing from like one talk to another. I was, like 8 or 9 months pregnant, as is very obvious in that photo. And it was just like a really fun, crazy time. I have had the opportunity to attend security conferences, both as a customer as well as a vendor. So when I started my career in InfoSec 16 years ago, the first 2 companies that I worked for were eBay and Zynga, both places where I led security teams. And so it's a very different experience to walk the conference floor and have a badge that says I'm on the eBay security team, I'm on the Zynga security team. And it's different to walk the conference floor and have a badge that says, I work for Symantec. So those are 2 perspectives that I bring to this conversation, both and either of which I would be happy to talk about.
Okay. Would you like to say more? What is it that you get out of speaking at these events, and what does your company get out of them?
So when I'm a speaker at the event, it is an opportunity to position myself as a thought leader. Having been on the vendor side now for 11 years, I think that folks at a conference, sometimes they want to hear sales pitches. Sometimes they want to learn about what a company's product or service is about. I think more often they're interested in thought leadership. And so it's an opportunity for me to talk about subjects that are not so much, this is Cobalt, we do pen testing as a service, this is how we do it, but rather to speak to larger, more broader themes like, what are the roles that human and automated play in terms of cybersecurity? You okay, buddy? This is, of course, what happens when you're presenting in a virtual situation.
So Caroline, what I'm going to do is let Omar speak, and we'll go back and forth with the questions a little bit and give you a minute. Okay, Omar, welcome.
Hello. No, I couldn't agree more with Caroline. I feel like, a lot of vendors, especially at the big sort of vendor-focused security conferences like RSA, make the mistake of pitching too much and trying to sell their solutions, and that really turns off people a lot. So, I think the way I look at cybersecurity conferences, especially the RSAs and the ones that are more like business-focused, vendor-focused, is differentiating yourselves by not pitching and not giving sales, sales demos and whatnot, really talking more big picture, talking more around specific areas of cybersecurity and educating as much as possible. I mean, you're in an environment with some of the smartest people in the specific, sector of technology. So, if you can impress them, if you can show them or teach them something, that's going to get them to want to learn a lot more about your solution, your offerings, and your organization. So Caroline, I could not agree more. I haven't personally spoken at many of the events. I've only attended as a vendor. But that's one thing I've definitely seen is from customers, what I've heard from customers, especially the smaller, more resource restrained IT professionals that go there really for educational purposes.
So while you have the floor, I'll ask you the same question I asked Caroline. What do you and your company get out of your participation at these events?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, the biggest thing I've taken away is just the networking opportunities, really one. And then the second thing is just understanding the vast sort of complexity of cybersecurity. So my company, every individual that starts here, I try to, at least before the pandemic, I try to make it mandatory for them to at least go one day to RSA when that conference comes here in San Francisco. Just so they can walk through the expo floor and really understand the pain points that our customers are going through. I think cybersecurity over the last 5 to 10 years has been piecemealed, together. And that's led to a lot of our customers running, siloed environments, running, multiple different solutions. And I think the biggest challenge in cybersecurity for these customers is the optimization of those solutions in their environment, because they're running in silos, because there's so many different products. In fact, one of the sort of perfect, one of the pillars of the perfect storm that we talk about a lot with our customers, we talk about, the changing way of work and remote work and, the move to the cloud as one pillar. The second pillar, the changing threat landscape and the more motivated and more sophisticated actors and bad actors. But the third pillar of that perfect storm of cybersecurity really falls onto vendors' shoulders. When you go to these conferences, you'll walk through the expo floor and you see, I think in 2012, there was about 200 different vendors with booths at RSA. The last year in 2020, there was over 800 vendors. And you're walking through it. It's it's all the same messaging, all talking about how much they've gotten funded, how proactive their security posture is, how big data driven it is, so on and so forth. And that gets really confusing for, I think, these IT professionals to really pick and choose the right solutions that's best for their environment, that actually is going to lead to a more secure and less and a less risky environment. So. That's what I get. I get to, a lot of networking. I get to see what's out there. But for my team, it's an opportunity for them to really understand the pain that our customers have to go through trying to navigate the cybersecurity landscape.
Great. And you've both been very conscious of not giving sales pitches for your company. But I think if you would each describe briefly what your company does so that the audience gets to know you and your a little bit better. Caroline, would you like to address that?
Sure, absolutely. So Cobalt is a pen test as a service company. We describe ourselves as a SaaS-enabled marketplace. So what we do is we have a closed, exclusive group of pen testers that we connect with organizations who need pen testing. We also think that pen testing is really not only about finding vulnerabilities in technology, but actually also getting those fixed. So we have a platform that allows the pen testers and the developers and the security folks to collaborate. So we're trying to give the world access to high quality security talent and facilitate collaboration so that security issues can get found and fixed. And Debbie, thank you so much for your patience as I was navigating my room situation here. I do want to just add to the question, what do you get out of these events? One of the things that I get out of events that either Cobalt has a presence at or that I speak to is actually getting to talk to customers. I get to hear what they're really focused on. What are their pain points? What are they thinking about? I get to really understand their perspective. Certainly sometimes we get leads, and if that's the case, it's great. But I also like to see how are other companies positioning themselves, and what is actually my response to the way that they're doing their messaging. So it's really a lot of different things.
Okay. Omar, tell us a little bit more about Port 53.
Yeah, definitely. Port 53, we really aim to enable and empower resource-restrained IT teams and IT generalists to run enterprise-level security postures. As we all know, security isn't just one thing or one tool, right? So initially, we started off with just helping them navigate the cybersecurity vendors and the controls sort of landscape. and really kind of deliver the solutions that made the most sense for a customer. Through that allowed us to build a strong customer base of over 1,500 customers. And once you have that level of customer base, I think the way you grow an organization is, as opposed to just building technologies or building products and trying to sell it, you can, as long as you have a really strong pulse on the customer base, you can really understand their biggest pain points, their biggest challenges, what they're kind of facing on a day in and day out basis, and in turn go out and build technologies and build services to be able to address that. So the last year and a half, 2 years, that's what we've really focused on, is obviously, still having that strong sort of controls business where we're consulting, delivering, implementing security tools and controls. But now we also help, these IT generalists run enterprise level GRC programs. So really helping them in navigating different compliance frameworks and understanding where they are compared to where they want to be and helping them in getting there. As well as, having a better understanding around their cyber threat management. So doing, providing things like 24/7 monitoring of their end controls of their environment. So a true MDR, XDR offering, as well as automated sort of penetration testing and vulnerability scanning to really streamline what it takes to run an enterprise level security posture for these IT teams that don't have CISOs or the engineering resources in-house.
Thank you, Omar. So Caroline, you have a question from...
Yes, so there is a question from Thad. Thank you so much for the question, Thad. Thad says, Caroline, not my experience that a lot of speakers give insights and thought leadership. So I find such elsewhere as it is more efficient and you get multiple views of the same thing, which really expands your thinking. So why go at all except to do deals or direct business? And Thad, I actually have a follow-up question. I'd love to understand if these are not the types of events where you go to get insights and thought leadership, then where do you go? What forums do you find to be effective if you're looking for those sorts of things? And I actually think that another reason that I go is actually to cultivate human relationships so that if I have an existing customer and I want to continue to build that relationship, or if I have a prospect and I'm working on turning that prospect into a customer, one of the things that happens in security is people change jobs all the time. So somebody might have been your customer at a previous company and maybe now they're at a new company. And that's a great opportunity to grab coffee, learn about their new role, learn about what they're facing that's new. Also, sometimes it takes time to convert prospects into customers. And I think that there's real value. Certainly for me, I get personal joy out of meeting folks that are doing interesting things. And so for me, there's a lot to be said, I think, for that human connection.
So, Omar, Thad asked, how do you get your customers or hot prospects face-to-face? And answer it both in the context of events and outside of events, please.
Definitely. I think for events, the one thing that we have a big focus on is definitely these live events, these conferences, but as opposed to just really targeting and focusing on cybersecurity conferences, things like, the RSAs, the Blackhats of the world. One thing that we're really targeting, the way we plan on getting in front of a lot of our customers and more importantly, these prospects, is going to their specific industry conferences. So going to like healthcare specific conferences, going to like public sector, IT meetups that we're a part of here in end of August, that we're going to like retail conferences, and really being that one booth or that one company that's there talking about, cybersecurity for retail or cybersecurity for healthcare. That's one thing I think that is going to differentiate us and sort of help in cutting through the noise. But for security conferences like this, I always, love guerrilla marketing tactics, ways that, pop, that stand out, that really is aimed at more than anything, sparking interest in getting somebody intrigued in your brand and in your message, which you have to offer. So one perfect example of that, I think last year, a few of you guys might have remembered this, but alongside Micah and Madison, we did a really fun sort of differentiated campaign, not only at Moscone Center where the RSA conference was being held, but across the entire city of San Francisco, to make sure that we were able to be in front of those sort of, side events or those lunches and dinners at the different restaurants and bars across the city. So we had about 40, 50 people in shirts just walking around with umbrellas, saying cut through the noise. And then we had a website over there just to spark their interest. When they went to the website, that's when we gave them a lot more information. So that was a fun little thing we did. to really stand out and more importantly, like you mentioned, get the eyes of those prospects and potential customers. But talking about potential customers, potential vendors, partners, the executives from different companies like Cisco and Lacework, I think that's another big value add, like Caroline mentioned, is just getting face time with these people that we work with. I mean, especially being a cloud-focused and cloud-delivered cybersecurity consulting firm, a lot of our customers we don't get in front of. We work, for the most part remotely, and same thing with our partners and vendors. So security conferences allows us to really get in front of them, have those, dinners, those drinks, and allows us to build those in-person relationships.
So I have a question for both of you. Did you participate in virtual events in 2021, in 2020 and 2021? And did you do RSA in 2021?
I did participate in both virtual events as well as participate in RSA 2021 specifically. I find that it's really, really different. There is not that getting to share a cup of coffee with someone. There's certainly no shaking hands. A lot of that sort of less formal, less structured human interaction, I think that's very challenging to do virtually. I think that from a speaker's perspective, there are huge advantages. I've had opportunities to speak at places that I might not have been able to fly to travel to, and therefore I've actually gotten to network with different communities that I may not have accessed had we been in more of an only physical presence type of situation.
Great. So I'm going to launch another poll. This one is about people's activities during COVID. And while people are answering that, Omar, I'd like to hear what you've been up to for the last year and a half.
Yeah, no, I think what Caroline mentioned around, speaking is a little easier. Not only being able to actually, attend, but the fact that you're not speaking to a room full of 8,000 people, right? So I spoke at Cisco Live for the first time ever, and it was a virtual talk. There was about 8,000 people on the call, but I felt like it was just a regular standard another conversation. So it was a little easier on myself as well, giving that speech and giving that presentation. But besides that, no, we haven't really focused much on virtual conferences. Again, because of where I think the value of these conferences really lies. It really lies around brand awareness. You can't really do brand awareness in a virtual conference. It lies around real meeting vendors, getting face-to-face time with potential clients, potential prospects, potential investors, and then really building those in-person relationships. So if you can't really do that, I didn't really see the value of going to these virtual conferences, at least for us per se. We did do a lot of smaller sort of like webinars that we hosted and smaller events. Like, we did like an Oktoberfest event focused on a specific theme of cybersecurity. We did like a wine tasting event. We did a whiskey event. So beer, whiskey, and wine, we hit all three of them. We continue. I think we're going to continue to do a lot more webinars and events like that, virtual events, smaller events. But virtual conferences, I didn't really see a lot of value in attending those.
So you talked about doing smaller events. Caroline, did your company change the mix of events that you did during COVID as well?
Did. This was a big transformation for us. We had in the past been, I would say, pretty successful. There's so many things that you can do in person from, at Blackhat, you can take folks to a raceway and you can fly them around in a helicopter. And, there's all sorts of like fun, novel things that you can do in person that's a little challenging to replicate virtually. Before, I used to be able to invite a group of people in a local area to a restaurant and we could enjoy a dinner together. These days it's sort of like, okay, you send a bottle of wine to their home or you do something like that. I think that actually the most effective virtual events that we've hosted really focus on allowing the attendees to network with each other. I think a lot of our customers and prospects are less interested in spending time with us and much more interested in spending time with each other. And if we can play a role in facilitating that, then I think that's value that we can add in a virtual environment.
Omar?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with Caroline. understanding where, the virtual conferences sort of lack in. Well, if you're going to attend it, how do you maximize what it does deliver on? And I think, having everyone on a screen, making sure that it is interactive, people getting a chance to, unmute themselves, hop on the panelist, a screen and actually converse. I mean, we had actually a little event yesterday, a smaller event. So it was a whiskey tasting event where a few of the guys on the chat, started talking to each other. And at the end, they asked me, like, hey, can you make sure you introduce us at the end of the call? Can you send me the contact information for this other person? So I could not agree more with Caroline. I think the biggest value, if you can bring in that sort of networking opportunity to these virtual events, I think that's great.
So I'd ask that a little bit more of the audience answer the poll before we publish the results. About half of you have done so, which is great. So I'll keep it open for just another couple of minutes. And you can already see there's a little networking going on in the chat. So people do that virtually, even if they can't do it in person for sure. Did you send whiskey, by the way, to the attendees, Omar?
Yeah, we did. So they're all in the U.S. luckily. And I mean, it was through an agency that we did it with. It wasn't me personally sending, but.
Nice. So at this point, I'd like each of you to tell us a story. Tell us, the story that you like to tell about something either really good that happened at an event or something that was really kind of not so good that happened at an event. Omar?
Yeah, sure. I think for me personally, I know I've talked a little bit about the downsides of these larger conferences, but the 100% is a lot of benefits from it as well, especially from an educational standpoint. So as Caroline said, as you have these thought leaders that are going and presenting, I think there's certain nuggets that you could take away from that. And that's the biggest thing for me personally with these conferences. If I'm taking the time out of my day, out of my schedule to attend a 3-day or 4-day conference, as long as I get 1 or 2 nuggets that really, help me out with my business or with my go-to-market or with my offerings or the way I interact with customers, then, I find it valuable. So one perfect example of that, I think, was when I went to the Gartner Risk Management and Security conference in London in 2018. They had the VP and director of IT from Maersk there, who was hit heavily with the WannaCry attack. And they were the guest speakers. They came in and talked a little bit about what they did in the aftermath of going through that sort of ransomware breach and the repercussions of that and the steps that they took to remediate and ensure it doesn't happen again. And at that conference was when they heavily talked about, okay, before we implemented any controls, before we put in any tools or anything like that, we looked at implementing NIST's cybersecurity framework, as sort of that North Star for us. So really understanding that it's not just small or mid-sized businesses that NIST CSF applies to, but it's all these large enterprises that have moved away from this best of breed sort of, point solution implementation and are really adopting this sort of, hey, let's choose a framework, use it as our North Star and aim for that level of maturity against that. Was really eye-opening for me. So that was a really cool story. It really changed our business model. It changed our go-to-market and a few other things. So
great.
There's great nuggets like that.
So I want to tell a story about when I flew to the other side of the country to present at a talk that we had paid for. And we had like 2 people in the audience. So this happens. Sometimes there's an opportunity to speak to hundreds of people, and sometimes you're speaking to a practically empty room. This has happened to me multiple times throughout my career. Now, there's a couple of things. One thing is that today, so many talks are videotaped, and so many people watch the talks online afterwards. So in that moment, at one conference, what I did was, because it was being videotaped, I acted just as I would if I were presenting to a completely full packed room. Because on the other side of it, I've had panels at RSA that I've done with lines literally down the hall. We did one talk. We did a series of talks over a series of years, a group of folks and I, about security metrics. And one year our session was so full that, the fire marshal wouldn't allow any more people in. And we ended up doing an encore session in the afternoon, while we were sipping whiskey. I mean, it was just, so these things, they happen, right? Sometimes you get a line out the door and sometimes you get two people showing up. And I think if you get two people showing up, you just pretend it's a full room because it's being videotaped and because folks are going to have an opportunity to watch your talk, which hopefully contains actual thought leadership and insights later. The other thing I do is if it's not being videotaped, I just say to everyone, you know, I've talked to a theater full and it was like 6 people showed up. And I said, everyone, if you don't mind, please get up out of your seats and just come. Let's just all sit together right here. And instead of it being me talking, let's actually take advantage of the time we have together and our shared interest. And let's actually just have a discussion about the topic instead of it being a presentation.
Great. So at this point, I am going to go back to that little slide that I didn't show, or didn't show for very long. So this is one of my favorite moments. This was at RSA. You can see Becky and Mike Loftus and a couple of other people from Zentera, and a very high-level analyst from one of the largest analyst companies in the world. Since I don't have her permission, I'm not showing her face or giving her name, but it was a great coup to be able to get her attention through Becky, of course. And for privacy reasons, you can see that we established a little wall. You can see that on the right of the image using our pull-up banners. And what you can't see is that the whole rest of the Zentera team is behind the speakers, creating a wall from the rest of the show floor. So we created this little private place, even right in the middle of the show floor. That was a lot of fun and pretty amazing at the time. And then I have a not so great story about a large company who will remain nameless until I let their name drop, who organized they did big events. This one traveled all the way to Florida or from California. And they were supposed to be all about the cloud, only for some reason, and I am not making this up, the middle of the show was when they decided to do a cloud update, and everybody's cloud went down for the rest of the show. So yeah, that was fun. And to make up for the fact that none of us could show what we came there to show, they gave us, kid you not, $5 Starbucks gift cards. So yeah, some things work out really well. You know, sometimes you get the bear and sometimes the bear gets you. That's all I have to say about that. Okay, so let's look at our poll results. Here we go. So not very many people, excuse me, voted, but there was participation in virtual events, and people liked it pretty well, but they really all missed the networking, which is an important thing to be aware of. None of the people who responded exhibited. I think their answer probably reflected the exhibits of people who did, and I'm not surprised that they were not the same, because I don't think that virtual exhibiting has really gotten to the point of being highly valued. But thank you everybody for answering. I hear that my video might be a little scratchy. I apologize for that, but I don't think there's anything I can do about it right this minute. So let's move on. We've talked about big events in the past. We've talked about how you've adapted during COVID. And what I'd like to know now is, what are you planning on doing going forward, right? I mean, the world has changed. Virtual events have come a long way. As you say, Caroline, people's expectations about how they participate have changed. What are you and your company's plans What are you looking forward to? And what do you think the industry is going to start looking like? Omar?
Yeah, I mean, I hinted at this a little beforehand, but I think coming out of the pandemic, we have a lot of plans to be at a lot of different sorts of conferences. We're going to make a huge push around our brand awareness at both security conferences, but also non-security related conferences, so industry-specific conferences. Being that one booth that all these organizations can come to learn more about cybersecurity in their specific industries and their specific lines of business. So. At the conferences, I think we're going to continue to do what we've done, those guerrilla marketing campaigns, really aim to shock people a little bit. I think being a small, nimble company allows us the benefit to be able to do things like that. But yeah, no, I think, moving forward, we're going to continue to do a lot of webinars, continue to do virtual events. But as these, conferences start opening up, I do plan to have a much bigger presence at them.
Okay. What about you, Caroline?
I think we're still trying to figure it out. I think that things are changing and the things that we used to do are not working, and we're still trying to figure out what works. And so I think there's room for a lot of experimentation. I also wonder a little bit if the way that we convert prospects to customers is changing. I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to make it easier for people to find us. We find that naturally, we have so much success converting inbound prospects, and outbound prospecting is much more challenging. And so that's really helping us to rethink things like, what's our demand generation strategy? What's our SEO strategy? How do we make it easy for people who need the problem that we can help them solved to find us?
Okay. So, Omar, one thing that we haven't really talked about yet is ROI on these kinds of things. You've talked about what some of the benefits are. Do you measure ROI? Do you think you'll be measuring it going forward? In general, how do you look at the cost-benefit trade-off?
Yeah, so for us, virtual events are a little easier to track ROI on, just because we could track the attendees, we could track, the pipeline that's generated on the back end. But so from a lead generation standpoint and actual sort of revenues and dollar standpoint, virtual events we've definitely done a better job at tracking. A lot of in-person live events, we don't track ROI per se from a dollar standpoint. It is more just, what comes out of it. So, did we forge a new partnership or a new relationship? Did we, meet with our current vendors, our current partners? Was I able to get my, new employees on the expo floor and show them, what we mean when we say, too much noise or everyone having the same messaging? So I think there's a lot of intrinsic value at these in-person conferences that we look at, but it is more. It's not more related towards ROI from a dollar standpoint. I think virtual conferences and virtual webinars and events, we track a little more diligently around that sort of ROI.
So both of you have touched indirectly on the fact that there may be a lot of value to these events, but they're not necessarily directly related to increased sales. Would you like to comment on that, Caroline?
Yeah, I think the dynamic is simply that prospects who are attending are just being hunted and hounded by hundreds of vendors, right? And so that's just a dynamic that we as vendors have to both accept and acknowledge, and figure out how we can differentiate ourselves. I think that one of the ways actually is maybe, rather than, and I can relate to this personally. I used to take an approach when I attended conferences to try to go to everything and see everyone. And I found that, it's just a different result than if I decide to really prioritize and say, okay, I'm going to focus a lot of my energy and effort on this dinner. I'm going to focus a lot of my energy and effort on this meeting. So I find that with a big conference, there's so much to participate in that it's easy to mistakenly, I think it's a mistake, try to be everywhere at once. And I know that for me and just the way that I manage my time and my energy, it's actually much better if I can try and do fewer things, but try and do those as well as I possibly can.
Right. Confusing motion for progress is one way that people sometimes talk about that. Do you want to add anything to that, Omar? I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah, no, I think, I was just thinking about the old ways that we used to track ROI at RSA when I was back at OpenDNS, and understanding how Cisco tracks it. I mean, they track it based off of number of badges that they scan, and then, tracks those badges throughout the pipeline for the next 6 to 9 months. So that's typically, I think, a lot of, at RSA, how they a lot of companies still track ROI, and then they incentivize the attendees, right? They have sales reps, they have marketing people, they actually even have people that they pay specifically to stay at that booth and get those badges scanned and get those leads, right? And I think that in turn, because these individuals are incentivized to do so, has led to this sort of culture where these customers are getting hounded, right? And obviously there's a lot of benefit to these conferences, or else these vendors and these people wouldn't be spending so much money on these booths. I think I heard somewhere that in 2020, the reason why these expos the expo floor had gotten so crazy was because about 60% of the paying attendees had a budget of $5 million or higher per year for IT security spend. So it makes sense why these vendors are doing some outlandish stuff, but it is getting a little to a point where I think everyone's a little tired of it. Everyone's ready for a new paradigm shift of getting these solutions, getting these vendors in front of these customers.
So that's a great transition. While we talk just a little bit about paradigm changes, I'm going to launch the final poll, which is just asking people what their thoughts are about what they want to do going forward, and we'll see what the audience thinks about some of the things we've been discussing. So I actually have some opinions about this as well when I was preparing for this webinar. And what I think is that these big events, they've gotten so expensive to be able to make any kind of an impact at all. I mean, it's obvious at RSA, but in some ways it's even more obvious at Blackhat, for those of you who have been there, where there are basically no small vendors. All of the attention is on the big vendors, and it feels a little bit like it was becoming an 800-pound gorilla kind of situation, okay? Which is kind of ironic given Blackhat's history, but nonetheless. And in some ways, I think the pandemic is going to feed into that dynamic, because it's going to be less and less effective for smaller companies. And I think smaller companies have a lot more options now. I mean, the kinds of things that you've been doing, Omar, where you're doing virtual events and you're going to be doing in-person events. And also some companies will, I think, be touring. So I think the idea that a lot of people are going to travel to an event with 45,000 people, or in the case of CES, 125,000 people, that's 125,000 people, okay, all in one city for one event. I think that's going to be a harder and harder sell. And the interesting question will be, is it going to start to be like Apple at CES, and I think even Google, where the biggest companies don't feel like they need to because they do their own events? So I think we might see more of a shift to companies focusing on their own events where they have a lot more control. And if they want to, take the money for a big company to go to one of those big shows, is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Whereas they could put on smaller events in 6 or 10 cities for about the same amount of money and probably get much more of that kind of one-on-one interaction that both of you have talked about as being one of the things that's the most valuable and that we all believe eventually leads to sales. So I'll be interested to see how that goes. I think also that there needs to be a way of doing virtual showcases. I think smaller companies have really been hurt by the lack of showcases, in-person showcases, because that was a primary marketing focus for them. Omar, you're fortunate in that you were big enough to be past that point when COVID hit. And if anybody has seen a really good virtual showcase, please raise your hand, you know, in one way or another, or chat or whatever. But I certainly haven't. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens going forward. Okay, Caroline, do you have any comments on paradigm shifting going forward?
I do think that it's actually really interesting for me as a parent. You know, this whole time, my 3-year-old has been sitting on an Android phone watching YouTube. You know, the level of technology sophistication that my 3-year-old and my 6-year-old exhibit are just astonishing to me. You know, and I think that what people, there's a lot to be said, I think, for short content video and information that can be consumed in a short period of time. I think folks have smaller attention spans, and that's an opportunity that we can take advantage of. You know, whether it's you're putting out, 30-second videos on LinkedIn, whether that's, maybe you're positioning something as a graphic novel. I think that, the days when I might expect someone to read through all 400 pages of a security textbook.
Okay, I don't know about anybody else, but for me, Caroline is a little frozen, so I'm going to ask Omar to speak while Caroline's internet catches up.
She is frozen for me as well, but I think one thing that we'll definitely see is similar to what the conversation around the future of work being a hybrid work model. I think that's the future of conferences as well, where, especially these large conferences are still going to have the in-person, event, the expo floor, and still going to, have create that environment where all of us can get together and have a purpose of going into the same city. But I think more and more, a lot of those sessions, a lot of those, thought leadership talks are going to be attended virtually by customers, by attendees. So that's really my thought process. And I think the question earlier that you posted, Debbie, around, the value of RSA, there's still going to be a ton of value. There's, I think the value is going to continue to change as this sort of paradigm shift continues to change over here. So in person, I think it's still going to exist, but I think more and more value is going to come from people attending virtually and getting, getting access to those talks and those speeches and those thought leadership sort of sessions and those subject matter expert, sessions over there.
So I'm going to share the results of the poll, and I think the attendees agree with you. So not everyone is planning on attending, and certainly I think fewer people are committed to that now in their minds than you would normally see. And they certainly agree that it's going to be hybrid in the future, and they're happy to see the old model change and morph into something that works better for everybody.
Definitely.
And granted, we're a kind of specialized audience, but I think if we have this kind of consensus on it, there's going to clearly be some pressure. And I think we won't even really start to see it until it comes time to start writing those big checks and companies look at what else they could do with the money.
Spend that money on, right?
Okay. I mean, putting on a virtual event costs so much less that you can devote much more to the follow-up and doing the kind of research. So when you collect hundreds and thousands of badge scans, which is a game that some companies play very well at RSA, you can't convert them really into leads until you can figure out which ones actually have some value. And that takes effort, right? So you can pay for that effort, or you can pay for getting a whole bunch of leads that you can't make much sense out of.
Right.
Okay, so we're getting to the end of our time. Are there questions? So so there's been some discussion in the chat. Somebody suggested the B-Sides conferences. So I've attended those, unnamed attendee named Jean. And actually, I've gotten a lot out of the auxiliary events that go on around RSA. Now, I will say one of the reasons for that is that I haven't always had a company to pay the outrageous fees that RSA charges for full access to content. But also, those events are smaller, and sometimes there's a lot of energy that have been put into making them be effective. So, for example, there are companies like FedScoop, which publishes a bunch of newsletters about security in the federal government. When they first came to RSA, they did a great series of events, but I think they decided that it didn't really pay off because the next year it was a lot lower key, which was still good, but not as good as getting lunch at the Four Seasons. So I'm not in it for the lunches, but I do notice it, is all I want to say on the matter. Are there other questions or comments from any of the other attendees at this point? The floor is open. Looks like Caroline had some connection problems, which I'm sympathetic with, at least for once, it wasn't me. Omar, while people put their thoughts together, is there anything else that you would like to say? Is there advice that you would like to give to attendees or vendors in addition to what you've already said to make the events work better for everybody?
Yeah, just kind of piggybacking off what Thad mentioned over here in the chat. I really do believe that these conferences would be a lot more effective for the customers and for the attendees there to looking for solutions or looking for help in cybersecurity. If the vendors did work more, hand in hand and did work together to really, condense and really, kind of deliver the correct messages of what their solution or what their solution portfolio does and what it does not do. So, I think if there is a more unified effort across the vendor base to really control the messaging and if there's any checks and balances as well, maybe having a third party, like sort of audit company, be a part of these expo floors, making sure that if a company is, saying that, hey, we want to put up all this information around who we are. Well, okay, we'll prove that you are that first before you can actually, before we give you that platform and before we give you that booth and before we let you say whatever the heck you want to say. So one, I think, just that vendor consolidation and the unified effort across vendors to deliver the correct messaging for these attendees, as well as there being some sort of, audits board or individuals who are, checking to make sure that these companies are properly, branding themselves and properly delivering the right messaging.
So that's a great note to end on, the idea of having curated shows where it's not just how big a check can you write. At this point, we are pretty much out of time. So what I'd like to do is very much thank Omar and Caroline. And I will also thank Caroline privately since unfortunately she had to drop off. Thank you participants and people in the audience. And I'd like to turn things back to Madison to close everything out.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Debbie, and thanks to Omar for chatting. I just wanted to say that, remind you all again that our next webinar will not be until August, and we'll be seeing some changes coming through in the next couple months, so keep an eye out. You should have also received a member feedback survey. It went out to everybody on our webinar attendee list. So please feel free to fill out that survey if you are interested in influencing the future of BCI. So thanks everybody and have a good day.